Hi, I'm Xavier Kane. For those of you who don't know the story about Ben and the Haunted Majora's Mask cartridge for the Nintendo 64, Creepypasta story, whatever, I'm about to tell it to you. Keep in mind, um, this story's kind of creepy, and yeah, so with that said, let's get started. Also, this is not me telling the story, I'm reading this right off the site, so here we go. I recently moved into my dorm room starting as a sophomore in college, and a friend of mine gave me his old Nintendo 64 to play. I was stoked, to say the least. I could finally play all of those old games of my youth that I hadn't touched in at least a decade. His Nintendo 64 came with a yellow controller and a rather shoddy copy of Super Smash Bros. And while beggars can't be choosers, needless to say, it didn't take long until I became bored of beating up level 9 CPUs. That weekend, I decided to drive around a few neighborhoods and about 20 minutes or so, few neighborhoods about 20 minutes or so off campus, hitting up all the local garage sales, hoping to score on some good deals from ignorant parents. I ended up picking up a copy of Pokemon Stadium, GoldenEye, in parentheses it says, fuck yeah, F-Zero, and two other controllers for $2. Satisfied, I began to drive out of the neighborhood when one last house caught my attention. I still have no idea why it did, I mean. There were no cars there and only one table was set up with random junk on it. But something sort of drew me there. I usually trust my gut on these things, so I got out of the I usually trust my gut on these things. So I got out of the car and was greeted by an old man. His outward appearance was, for lack of a better word, displeasing. It was odd. If you ask me to tell you why I thought he was displeasing, I couldn't really pinpoint anything. There was just something about him that put me on edge. I can't explain it. All I can tell you is that if it wasn't in the middle of the afternoon and there were other people within shouting distance, I would not have even thought of approaching this man. He flashed a crooked smile at me and asked what I was looking for, and immediately I noticed he must have been blind in one of his eyes. His eye had that glazed over look about it. I forced myself to look to his left eye instead, trying not to offend, and asked him if he had any old video games. I was already wondering how I could politely excuse myself from the situation when he would tell me he had no idea what a video game was. But to my surprise, he said he had few of them in an old box. He assured me he'd be back in a jiffy. And he assured me he'd be back in a jiffy and turned to head back into the garage. As I watched him hobble away, I couldn't help but notice what he was selling on his table. Littered across his table were rather peculiar paintings, various artworks that looked like the ink blot things that a psychiatrist might show you. Curious, I looked through them. It was obvious why nobody was visiting this guy's garage sale. They weren't exactly aesthetically pleasing. As I came to the last one, for some reason it almost looked like Majora's Mask, the same heart-shaped body with little spikes protruding outward. Initially, I just thought that since I was secretly hoping to find that game at these garage sales, some I still Freudian, whatever bullshit was projecting itself into the ink blots. But given the events that happened afterward, I'm not so sure now. I should have asked the man about it. I wish I would have asked the man about it. After staring at the Majora-shaped blot, I looked up and the old man was suddenly there again, arm's length in front of me, smiling at me. I admit I jumped out of reflex and I laughed nervously as he handed me a Nintendo 64 cartridge. It was a standard gray color, except that someone had written Majora on it in black permanent marker. I got butterflies in my stomach as I realized what a coincidence this was and asked the man how much he wanted for it. The old man smiled at me and told me that I could have it for free, that it used to belong to a kid who was about my age that didn't live here anymore. There was something weird about how the man phrased that, but I didn't really pay any attention to it then. I was too caught up in not only finding this game, but getting it for free, which I have to admit I'd be pretty excited about too. The one I got my version for $20. Well, I wish I'd got mine for free. Damn it. Anyways, I reminded myself to be a bit skeptical since this looked like a pretty shady cartridge and there was no guarantee it would work. But then the optimist side of me interjected that maybe it was some kind of beta version or pirated version of the game. And that was all I needed to be back on cloud 9. I thanked the man and then he smiled at me and wished me well, saying, "Goodbye then." At least that's what it sounded like to me. All the way in the car ride home, I had a nagging doubt that was what the man had actually said. My fears were confirmed when I booted up the game. To my surprise, it worked just fine, and there was one save file on it, simply named Ben. "Goodbye, Ben," he was saying. "Goodbye, Ben." I felt bad for the man, obviously a grandparent and obviously going senile, and I, for some reason or another, reminded him of his grandson Ben. Out of curiosity, I looked at the save file, eyeballing it. I could tell that it was that he was pretty far into the game. He had almost all of the masks and three-fourths of the remains of the bosses. For those of you who do not know, Majora's Mask has 4 bosses. You get masks from each of them. You get 1 mask from each of them. Like I said, 4 bosses, and that's excluding the final boss that has 3 forms. I haven't played the game in a while. Anyways, so back on story. I noticed that he had used an owl statue to save his game. He was on day 3 and by the Stone Tower Temple, with hardly an hour left before the moon would crash. I remember thinking that it was a shame that he had come so close to beating the game, but he never finished it. I made a new file named Link out of tradition and started the game, ready to relive my childhood. I'm going to stop there, but as one more side note, I think that, so if the hardly an hour left before the moon would crash, I believe that means in game an hour is like 1 minute. So my guess is that means that he probably had 1 minute before the moon would crash, which unless you're like it's probably, and it's like, nah, it is impossible to get through that temple in 1 minute. I guarantee you. Anyways, so I'm only reading the first half of that because this is getting a little long. I will make another video with the other half of it, right after I upload this one. So, yeah. Later.